Stop breaking promises to yourself and build self-discipline to get what you want. You've broken more promises to yourself than anyone else ever could. You've said, "This time will be different." You've written plans, set alarms, watched motivational videos, and whispered to yourself that tomorrow you'll finally start doing what you said you would. But when the moment comes, when the time arrives to act, you find yourself hesitating. You find yourself doing something easier. You tell yourself, "It's fine, I'll do it later." Yet deep down you already know what will happen. Later becomes never, and another silent promise is buried under a pile of good intentions. This isn't about productivity or scheduling. It's about self-betrayal. Every time you say you'll do something and don't, your mind learns one dangerous lesson: I can't trust myself. That sentence is poison. It destroys confidence more than failure ever could. Because when you can't trust your own word, every goal, every dream, every plan begins to collapse from the inside. You don't believe in your potential because your potential keeps seeing you break your own word. You see, discipline isn't just about habits. It's about identity. It's not what you do, it's who you become in the process. When you say, "I'll go to the gym," or "I'll stop wasting time," you're not just making a plan, you're making a contract with your future self. Every time you follow through, you reinforce that contract. You send a signal to your subconscious that says, "I can depend on me." But every time you skip the workout, break the plan, or look the other way when it's time to take responsibility, you weaken that signal. You turn your own voice into background noise, and once your mind stops believing you, everything gets harder. You start searching for external motivation because your internal credibility is gone. You chase videos, books, words from other people, trying to borrow their energy because yours has no foundation left. That's why you keep starting and stopping, setting goals and abandoning them. You're not lazy, you're just standing on a broken agreement. The painful truth is this: when you constantly break promises to yourself, you create a split identity. There's the version of you who speaks, the one full of dreams and ambition, and the version of you who acts, the one who hesitates, avoids, and chooses comfort. And the distance between those two versions becomes your suffering. That gap is why you feel anxious, guilty, and restless even when life looks fine on the surface. You know you're living below what you're capable of. You know you're letting yourself down, and you can't lie to your own reflection. What's worse is that this pattern doesn't just make you unproductive, it makes you hollow. Because every unkept promise carries a weight, a quiet, invisible weight that follows you into every decision. You start to second-guess yourself. You stop dreaming big. You settle for less because somewhere in the back of your mind a voice whispers, "You won't do it anyway." And that's the most tragic part. You don't even need anyone to doubt you anymore. You've become your own critic, your own enemy, your own obstacle. But here's something most people never realize. Breaking promises to yourself isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of conflict. A conflict between who you are now and who you want to become. It's the battle between comfort and purpose, and comfort has had the upper hand for too long because it feels safe, familiar, and easy to justify. But comfort is not your friend. It's your silent destroyer. It tells you that skipping one task doesn't matter, that resting one more day won't hurt, that you'll do it tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes, and that's how years disappear. If you're tired of that feeling, the feeling of being stuck in the same loop of watching yourself promise and fail over and over again, then this message is for you. Because discipline isn't about punishment. It's about rebuilding trust with yourself. It's about becoming someone whose words mean something again, someone who acts even when no one is watching, someone whose respect for their own potential is stronger than the pull of their excuses. You don't need more motivation. You need credibility with yourself. You need to earn your own trust back, because when you finally do, every goal starts to feel possible again. You stop waiting for the right time. You stop needing to feel ready. You start acting because it's who you are, not because it's convenient. So before we talk about how to build self-discipline, you have to understand this. You don't have a discipline problem. You have a trust problem. And until you rebuild that trust, nothing you try will last. You can read every book, follow every method, and still fall apart if your mind doesn't believe your words anymore. The question is, how long will you keep living this way? How many more broken promises will it take before you realize the pain isn't from failing others, it's from failing yourself? Because once you understand that, change stops being an option. It becomes a decision. Every time you break a promise to yourself, you chip away at something far more valuable than time or progress. You erode your self-identity. You start to believe that you are someone who never follows through, someone who always quits halfway, someone who means well but never finishes. And that belief becomes your new self-image, built one broken promise at a time. It doesn't happen overnight, it happens quietly, almost invisibly, until one day you wake up and realize you no longer trust your own word. When you tell yourself, "I'll start tomorrow," and you don't, your brain records that failure. Not to punish you, but to protect you. The mind's job is to look for patterns, and when it sees inconsistency, it begins to adapt. It starts to lower its expectations of you. It begins to whisper, "Don't get excited. We've been here before." That's how dreams die, not with rejection, but with internal disbelief. Your subconscious stops supporting your goals because it has learned that your words don't lead to action. This erosion of trust doesn't stay in one area. It spreads. It seeps into relationships, work, habits, even how you handle emotions. You start to play small because you no longer believe in your own follow-through. You tell yourself that playing it safe is mature. But deep down, you know it's fear disguised as wisdom. You stop committing to things fully because commitment now feels dangerous. What if you fail again? What if you let yourself down again? That fear of repeating the same pain becomes the wall between who you are and who you want to be. You don't realize how damaging that is until you notice how much you hesitate before saying yes to anything that matters. You hesitate not because you don't want it, but because you don't believe you'll sustain it. It's a defense mechanism against disappointment, and it's slowly robbing you of your potential. That's the hidden cost of inconsistency. It makes you doubt your ability to change. It trains your mind to expect weakness instead of resilience. So even when you decide to start again, there's a voice inside that says, "Don't bother, you'll quit anyway." That's not a lack of motivation, that's self-conditioning. You've taught your brain that your promises are optional, not binding. And here's the truth most people ignore. Discipline is built on trust, not effort. You can't force yourself into consistency. You have to believe that your word matters again. You have to rebuild that sense of integrity where your mind recognizes your decisions as final, not negotiable. Without that belief, discipline becomes a cycle of punishment. You push hard for a few days, fail, then feel ashamed, and then retreat into comfort again. It's not a lack of willpower, it's the loss of internal authority. When you stop keeping promises, your brain stops taking you seriously. You become a background voice in your own life, the person who speaks but doesn't lead. And once your mind stops respecting your commands, no amount of motivation will fix it. Because at its core, discipline is the relationship between your thoughts and your actions. When that relationship breaks, so does your progress. That's why rebuilding discipline starts with small, almost invisible commitments. You don't need to change your entire life at once. You need to prove to yourself, through action, that your voice carries weight again. Because self-discipline isn't born from intensity, it's born from integrity. The moment you start doing what you say, even in small ways, your brain begins to rewire. It starts to associate your words with movement again. It starts to trust you. This is how confidence grows, not from external success, but from the quiet evidence of self-trust. Every small action becomes a vote for the kind of person you want to be, and the more votes you cast, the more your identity shifts. You stop being someone who tries and start being someone who does. But make no mistake, rebuilding that trust is uncomfortable. It's humbling. It forces you to face every excuse, every rationalization, every time you've let yourself off the hook. And it's here where most people give up again, because the pain of facing their inconsistency feels heavier than the reward of fixing it. Yet this is the moment that defines whether you stay stuck or rise. Because healing this pattern isn't about doing more. It's about keeping your word, especially when no one's watching. When you start honoring even the smallest promises, waking up when you said you would, following the plan when it's inconvenient, saying no when it's uncomfortable, you rebuild your internal foundation. Slowly, your mind begins to say, "I can count on me again." And that's the exact moment transformation becomes possible. Because no one fails from lack of talent, they fail from lack of self-trust. And if you've lost that trust, you can rebuild it. It's not gone, it's just waiting for proof. There's a voice inside you that knows exactly what you need to do. It's quiet, steady, honest, and it doesn't negotiate. It tells you to get up, to stay focused, to stop making excuses. But there's another voice, louder, cleverer, and far more persuasive. It tells you to rest a little longer, to take it easy, to wait until the moment feels right. That second voice has kept more people stuck than failure ever could, because it doesn't sound like the enemy. It sounds like self-care. But make no mistake, that voice isn't protecting you, it's protecting your comfort. This is the inner war, the daily battle between your higher self and your weaker impulses, the version of you that wants change versus the version of you that wants safety. The fight doesn't happen in gyms, offices, or journals. It happens in silence, in the few seconds between intention and action. Every time you hesitate, that's where the war is being fought. And every time you choose comfort, you lose a piece of yourself to it. Most people think self-discipline means pushing harder or working longer. But real discipline begins in the mind. It's not a matter of strength, it's a matter of alignment. Every time you go against what you said you would do, you create friction, a split between who you are and who you're trying to become. That split is why you feel exhausted even when you've done nothing, because resisting your own potential drains more energy than action ever will. Let's look deeper. The voice that begs for comfort isn't evil, it's ancient. It comes from the part of your brain designed to keep you safe, to conserve energy, to avoid pain. In a world where danger used to be real, predators, famine, war, that instinct kept humans alive. But now the threats are psychological. The danger is discomfort, uncertainty, embarrassment, failure. And the brain hasn't evolved fast enough to tell the difference. So when you try to build discipline, your own mind treats it like a threat. That's why it's so hard. You're fighting a biological program that confuses effort with danger. You're not weak, you're wired for safety. But you're also wired for growth, and that's the paradox. Growth requires risk, discomfort, and exposure to failure, all of which your primitive brain wants to avoid. That's why success feels like suffering at first. Your nervous system interprets progress as pain. And every time you give in to comfort, you're choosing momentary relief over long-term strength. You might think, but sometimes I need rest. Yes, rest is necessary. But what most people call rest is avoidance disguised as recovery. True rest restores energy. Avoidance drains it. You know the difference. One leaves you ready to move again. The other leaves you guilty and restless. The only way to know which one you're practicing is to look at how you feel afterward. In this war, every small decision is a weapon. The alarm goes off, that's a battle. You promised to focus, that's a battle. You said you'd speak your truth instead of staying quiet. That's a battle too. The outcome of your life is decided in these moments that seem small but aren't. Because every time you choose discipline over comfort, you train your mind to obey your higher self instead of your weaker one. You might think discipline is about restriction, but it's actually about freedom. Freedom from the constant tug of war inside your head. When you train your mind to act despite resistance, you stop negotiating with yourself. You silence the second voice, and that silence is power. Still, understand this, the war never fully ends. The pull of comfort never disappears. It just loses its control. The disciplined person still hears that voice, they just don't listen anymore. They recognize the difference between self-care and self-sabotage, between what feels good and what makes them good. This is where transformation begins, not when life gets easier, but when your inner dialogue changes. When you stop saying, "I'll do it when I feel like it," and start saying, "I'll do it because I said I would." That sentence alone reshapes your identity, because the strongest person isn't the one who never doubts themselves. It's the one who acts with doubt and does it anyway. So remember this, comfort is seductive, but it's a liar. It promises peace and delivers regret. It offers safety and steals time. The truth is harsh but simple. If you keep obeying your comfort, you'll spend your life fighting the same battles, telling the same stories, living the same year on repeat. Discipline isn't about becoming someone new overnight. It's about choosing your future self in every small moment where your old self begs you not to. There comes a point when you get tired of your own excuses, when the cycle of starting, quitting, and promising again becomes unbearable. You begin to realize that you're not fighting time or luck or even your circumstances. You're fighting the quiet voice inside that says it's okay to let yourself down. That's the moment the shift begins. Not when you find motivation, but when you lose patience with your own inconsistency. The truth is, transformation doesn't start with grand gestures. It starts in the smallest acts of self-respect. The moment you keep a promise that no one else will ever know about. The moment you decide that your word matters, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when no one's watching. That's where the foundation of self-discipline is built. The shift happens when you understand that discipline isn't a punishment. It's a declaration. Every time you do what you said you'd do, you're not just completing a task. You're proving to yourself that you can depend on you. And that's the most powerful feeling in the world. Because the moment you start trusting yourself again, life changes in ways you can't imagine. Your goals stop feeling impossible. Your dreams stop feeling like fantasies. They start to feel inevitable because you finally believe you can sustain them. But to get there, you have to stop romanticizing motivation. Motivation is emotion. It rises and fades. Discipline is decision. It stays. Motivation says, "I feel like it." Discipline says, "I said I would." Motivation burns out when things get hard. Discipline grows stronger because things are hard. And the more you choose discipline over motivation, the less you depend on moods to move forward. That's the shift from emotion-driven living to principle-driven living. Here's the paradox. The more you act disciplined, the more motivated you become, because action feeds clarity, and clarity fuels drive. Most people wait to feel ready before they begin, but readiness is born from movement, not thought. The first step is always the hardest, but it's also the one that rewires everything. Think about it. Every time you break a promise, you're teaching your brain that your comfort is more important than your commitment. But every time you follow through, no matter how small, you're rewriting that belief. You're saying, I keep my word. You're retraining your brain to trust your intentions again. This is neuroplasticity in real life. Your brain literally begins to associate effort with safety instead of pain. That's why it's never about the size of the action. It's about the integrity behind it. Waking up when you said you would. Finishing what you started. Saying no when you mean no. These acts seem ordinary, but they carry extraordinary power because they rebuild the bridge between thought and action, the very bridge your old habits destroyed. As this internal trust strengthens, something profound happens. The noise in your mind quiets down. The guilt, the hesitation, the constant second-guessing, it starts to fade. You stop needing validation because you already have proof. Proof that you're reliable. Proof that you're capable. Proof that when you say something, it's real. And here's the part no one tells you. Once you cross that threshold, the feeling is addictive. Not the quick dopamine hit that comfort gives you, but the deep, steady satisfaction that comes from keeping your word. It's a kind of peace that comfort can never buy, because comfort feels good for a moment, but self-respect feels good for a lifetime. You start realizing that discipline isn't restriction, it's self-honor. It's the act of aligning your actions with your values, even when your emotions don't agree. You stop needing to feel like doing it. You start doing it because it's who you are now. And that shift in identity is what separates the dreamers from the doers. You see, when you break a promise to yourself, you're letting your emotions lead your actions. But when you build discipline, you reverse that. You make your actions lead your emotions. You act first, feel later. You become the kind of person who doesn't ask, do I want to? But rather, is this aligned with who I'm becoming? And that's when something incredible happens. Your inner conflict fades, because the part of you that used to argue, bargain, and delay begins to lose its power. You've taught it a new truth. I don't need to feel ready to be consistent. That's the real shift. It's not dramatic, not cinematic. It's quiet, subtle. It happens the moment you stop asking for permission from your feelings to honor your word. So ask yourself right now, when was the last time you did what you said you'd do, just because you said it? No excuses, no delay, no negotiation. That's where the change begins. Because when you start keeping promises to yourself, you stop waiting for life to give you what you want and start building it, one decision at a time. There's a moment in every person's life when they realize the truth they've been avoiding. Discipline is not about control. It's about loyalty, not to rules, not to systems, but to yourself. The person you're becoming depends entirely on the promises you keep when no one's watching. That's the essence of the breakthrough, when you stop chasing motivation and start pursuing integrity. You see, the reason you've struggled to stay consistent isn't because you lack strength. It's because you've spent your life negotiating with your excuses. You've built a habit of self-betrayal and called it being realistic. Every time you said, I'll start tomorrow, you created a gap between intention and action. And the truth is, those tiny gaps are what create a lifetime of regret. The breakthrough begins when you refuse to live with that gap anymore, when you stop saying, I'll try, and start saying, I will. That small change in language shifts the foundation of your identity, because trying gives you an escape. Doing locks the door behind you. It means there's no way back, only forward. And once you start operating with that level of self-respect, you become unstoppable. But don't confuse this with perfection. Discipline isn't about never failing. It's about never abandoning yourself when you fail. It's about staying in the fight, even when the progress is invisible. The most disciplined people you admire aren't the ones who never stumble. They're the ones who get up faster every time they do, because they've learned that consistency matters more than intensity. That's what keeps them moving when everyone else quits. You can't build a life of greatness on broken promises. You can't claim to want freedom while remaining loyal to your own weakness. Every time you break your word, you prove to yourself that comfort is your master. Every time you keep it, you remind yourself that you are. And that's where true power begins, not in willpower, but in integrity. You've been conditioned to think that self-discipline is harsh, that it means suppressing your emotions or forcing yourself to suffer. But in truth, discipline is the highest form of self-love. It's saying, I believe in the person I'm becoming so much that I'm willing to disappoint who I am right now. That's what it means to grow. That's what it means to evolve. When you start acting from that place, everything changes. You stop setting goals just to feel inspired and start setting standards you actually live by. You stop waiting for perfect conditions and begin building strength in imperfect ones. You stop being a follower of your moods and become a leader of your actions. That's the shift from emotion-driven to purpose-driven living. Here's the truth. Your word is your power. Every time you speak a promise, you're creating a contract between your present self and your future self. Every action you take is either honoring that contract or breaking it. Most people don't fail because of lack of opportunity. They fail because they keep defaulting on the agreements they made with themselves. Think about how you feel when someone lies to you repeatedly. That disappointment, that frustration, that loss of respect, that's what your subconscious feels every time you break a promise. You can't inspire yourself if you don't respect yourself. That's why you keep looking for motivation in other people's voices, because your own has lost authority. But the good news is this: you can rebuild that authority, not by talking more, but by acting more, by starting small and staying consistent. You rebuild it every morning you get up when you said you would. Every time you finish what you start. Every time you do the uncomfortable thing that your old self would have avoided. Each of those acts is a vote for the person you're becoming. A vote for strength over comfort, truth over excuses. You'll know you've hit the breakthrough when keeping promises to yourself starts to feel natural, when you stop overthinking and start doing. When you no longer need motivation to act, because action is who you are now. That's when you realize that self-discipline was never about force, it was about trust. And here's what's even more powerful. Once you rebuild that trust with yourself, every area of your life starts to shift. Your relationships improve because you no longer tolerate half-truths, not from others and not from yourself. Your focus sharpens because you're no longer at war with indecision. Your confidence rises not from external validation, but from quiet evidence. You said you would, and you did. This is the point where your future begins to respect you. It starts opening doors that once seemed locked. Because the universe doesn't reward wishful thinking, it rewards consistency. Every step you take in integrity is an invitation for more opportunities to appear. And one day you'll look back and realize something profound. The discipline you resisted was never a burden. It was the bridge to everything you ever wanted. At some point, you stop chasing change and start becoming it. You stop waiting for life to click, for habits to stick, for inspiration to arrive. And instead you build a standard so solid that it doesn't depend on mood, motivation, or circumstance. That's what real discipline looks like. Not the loud, overhyped version people post online, but the quiet, steady, almost sacred commitment to live in alignment with who you said you would become. This new standard isn't about perfection, it's about consistency. It's not about how you perform when you feel strong, it's about how you respond when you feel weak. Because anyone can be disciplined when it's easy. True discipline begins when no one's watching, when no one will notice, when the world gives you every excuse to slip back into comfort, and you don't. The standard is simple. Your word means something. When you say you'll do something, it's already done. Not because you're superhuman, but because you've learned that self-respect can't coexist with broken promises. You no longer act based on how you feel. You act based on what you've decided. Because feelings are fleeting, but decisions define direction. And here's the shift that happens when you live this way. Your relationship with yourself transforms. You stop arguing with your potential. You stop negotiating your effort. You stop viewing discipline as a burden and start seeing it as freedom. Because that's what it really is. Freedom from the chaos of your impulses, from the endless loop of guilt and hesitation, from the constant back and forth between I want to and I should. You start operating from clarity instead of confusion. You stop chasing highs and start building stability. You realize that the peace you've been searching for doesn't come from comfort. It comes from congruence, from being in full alignment with your values, your actions, and your word. Most people spend their lives waiting for external validation before they move. They want someone to notice, to approve, to say, "Now you're doing well." But when you live by this standard, that need dissolves, because self-trust becomes your validation. You no longer need to prove anything, not to the world, not even to yourself. The proof is in your actions. This is what separates the person who talks about change from the person who embodies it. The talker is driven by emotion. The doer is anchored in discipline. The talker looks for a spark. The doer is the spark. That's why the disciplined person doesn't need to announce their effort. Their life speaks for them. The way they move, the way they handle adversity, the calmness they carry. It's all evidence of internal order. That's what building discipline gives you, peace through structure. And let's be honest, peace isn't the absence of problems. It's the presence of principles. It's knowing that no matter how chaotic things get, you have something unshakable inside you. A code that won't bend just because life gets difficult. That's your new foundation. But this standard doesn't come cheap. It demands something in return: your excuses, your comfort, your dependency on good days. It requires sacrifice, but what you get in exchange is self-respect. The kind of respect that doesn't need to be earned from others because it's already built within. When you start living this way, you'll notice something subtle. Life doesn't necessarily get easier, but you get steadier. The storms don't stop, but you stop being blown away by them. You stop collapsing when things get uncomfortable because discomfort no longer threatens your identity. It refines it. You become the kind of person people can count on, not because you're trying to impress them, but because you've mastered counting on yourself. And that's the real reward. Because once your actions consistently match your intentions, you become unshakable. And this is where the journey turns inward again. Once you've built discipline, the goal isn't to become harder, it's to become clearer. Discipline isn't a cage, it's a compass. It points you back to your purpose every time distraction tries to pull you away. You don't follow discipline because it's easy. You follow it because it's honest. Because it reminds you that the life you want isn't built in motivation but in maintenance. Not in flashes of effort, but in the quiet repetition of self-respect. So from this point on, you don't lower your standard to match your moods. You raise your effort to meet your standard. Because the moment you do, you stop being controlled by your feelings and start being guided by your principles. And that's when you realize that discipline wasn't about becoming perfect. It was about becoming dependable, the kind of person your future can count on. Stand in front of the mirror for a moment, not to fix your hair, not to check your face, but to really look at yourself, to meet your own eyes. Behind that reflection is the one person who knows every lie you've told, every excuse you've justified, every promise you've broken. You can fool the world, but you can't fool that person. And deep down, that's the reason you feel the way you do when you don't follow through. It's not the missed workout, the wasted hour, or the delayed plan. It's the quiet, knowing that you let yourself down again. This isn't about guilt. It's about truth. Because truth is where all change begins, and the truth is, you'll never build the life you want until you stop breaking promises to yourself. Not because those promises are magical, but because you are. Every commitment you make to yourself is a seed. Every time you break it, you pull that seed out of the ground before it ever has the chance to grow. So look again. That reflection isn't your enemy. It's your contract. The person staring back at you is both the problem and the solution. The reason you're stuck and the way out. Every time you choose action over excuses, every time you choose discomfort over delay, you're rewriting the story of that person in the mirror. You're telling them, "I've got you now, you can trust me again." That's the real promise. Not that you'll never fail, but that you'll never abandon yourself again. Because failure doesn't destroy you. Disloyalty to your own word does. You've spent years proving to your mind that you can't be trusted. Now it's time to prove the opposite. And it starts with one small, unglamorous decision to do what you said you would, no matter how you feel. That single act, repeated every day, rebuilds the bridge between who you are and who you're meant to be. So before you walk away from the mirror, make yourself a new kind of promise, one you actually intend to keep. Promise that you'll act even when you don't feel like it, that you'll show up for yourself even when no one's watching, that you'll build discipline not to impress others, but to respect yourself. And one day, when you stand in front of that same mirror, you'll recognize the person staring back at you, not because they're perfect, but because they're whole, because their word and their actions finally match, because their reflection no longer feels like a stranger, but like someone you can finally be proud of. So ask yourself right now, what's one promise you can make today that you refuse to break? Not tomorrow, not next week, now. Because this isn't about being ready, it's about being real. And the person in the mirror is waiting to see if you mean it this time. Don't promise you'll change tomorrow. Act today. And if you need a voice to remind you of who you're capable of becoming, you'll find it here. Subscribe, and let's rebuild your strength one promise at a time.